Hey guys, Mr. Breen here, and in this video I'll be talking about consumer surplus and producer surplus. So whenever people trade, it benefits them, right? Otherwise they wouldn't do it. And this kind of trade with supply and demand, this is no different, right? Okay, so if we remember that the supply curve is really just the cost curve, it's just the marginal cost curve, okay? So to make this quantity, okay, the very last one cost this much to make. Okay, but somebody was willing to buy that for that much. Okay, so between producing it and supplying it to the person who wanted it, society gains by that much on that good. And on this good, okay, society gains by that much. The difference between these two curves, how much somebody was willing to pay and how much it cost to make it. So in this example, if we're at equilibrium, so that is, if we're producing at this price, where the supply and demand curves meet, and therefore are producing this quantity of the good, okay, then the total benefit to society is the total area between these two curves, right there. Of course, who actually gets that benefit? Well, some of it goes to the people who buy the good, and some of it goes to the people who produce the good. But how much benefit goes to each? So I'll start with talking about how much goes to the consumer. So consumers gain when they buy a good because presumably whatever they bought is worth more to them than the money they spent buying it. So for example, if I walk into a store and I buy a bag of combos for $2 or whatever it is, then I must have valued that bag of combos at more than $2. Let's say I valued it at $3. Well, in that case, my consumer surplus, how much I gain, would be $1. Now, nobody handed me $1. I can't put that dollar in a bank account. But what I own is now $1 more valuable to me than it used to be just a second ago before I'd bought the bag of combos. Now, that fact can be represented on our graph in this way. Okay, I had to pay price P. Okay, there's our price. And I was willing to pay, or everybody here is willing to pay that much. The demand curve is how much you're willing to pay. Okay, so how much you're willing to pay minus how much you actually bought it for is consumer surplus. So whoever bought this quantity of the good, okay, if I went all the way down, whoever bought that quantity, Q1, their consumer surplus is represented by this line. Okay, the difference between what they were willing to pay and what they actually had to pay. Somebody else had this one, and another person had that one, and another person that one, and that one, and that one. And really, you're just going to get the area here, above price but below the demand curve. Now, producer surplus is a little more straightforward because the producers are handed money for making the good, okay? And so again, if I'm a producer of combos, whatever, I produced it at this marginal cost, okay, and I sold it for that price. And so on this quantity of the good, this one, okay, quantity 1, all right, I sold it for that much, but it only cost that much to make, so that's my profit, okay. But if I make that one, I make that much profit, and if I make this one, I make this much profit, this much, this much, this much, this much, okay. This area is producer surplus, also known as profit. Okay, the last two examples I showed you were producer and consumer surplus at equilibrium, but the market isn't always in equilibrium, so what happens then? Well, what if the price is this lower price, this price here? Okay, now you know that at that price there's going to be a shortage. So that's quantity demanded. Oh, that's terrible. That looks bad, but okay. That's quantity demanded, and this is quantity supplied at that price. But, so you also know that QS, that's where actual production is going to be. Suppliers aren't willing to supply any more of that, so that is how many will be made. Okay, now, all right, here's producer surplus right there. It's everything between the price and the supply curve. Okay, another way of saying that is it's the difference between the price they can charge and how much it costs them to make it, i.e. profit. All right, now for consumers, they were only able to buy this quantity. Okay, so that's one of our boundaries here. And then the consumer surplus is everything between the demand curve, that is how much they were willing to pay, and the price they actually had to pay. So here, we'll put them the other way, here's consumer surplus. Now if I had drawn this a little bit better, this area would look more like a trapezoid, which it should. Okay, and this area is still a triangle. You'll notice that if we were at equilibrium, we'd have all of this area too. Okay, but we don't. Because we're not at equilibrium, we miss out on this economic benefit, which is called deadweight loss. Now, what if the price is higher? What if the price is up here? Okay, now we know that up there, there's going to be a surplus because there's quantity supplied and there's quantity demanded. Okay, so at this higher price, we know that this is how many will be produced, or how many at least will be purchased by anybody. Okay, so because, you know, at this price, consumers don't want to buy all this stuff that was produced out here. So in this case, here's our consumer surplus right up there. It's the difference between the demand curve, how much people were willing to pay, and the price they actually had to pay. Now, because only this many was made, okay, that's one of our boundaries for profit, and then the supply curve is our cost curve. So the difference between the price they were able to charge and how much it cost them to make it, that's profit, or consumer surplus. So that area, that ought to look like a trapezoid. Notice again that because we're not at equilibrium, there's this area of loss that somebody would have gained. Okay, if we were at equilibrium, then that would be consumer surplus, and this would be producer surplus. So we'd be able to split this triangle between producers and consumers, but because we're not at equilibrium, society misses out on this much benefit. Okay, it would have been nice to produce that because it only cost that much to produce, but people valued it at that much. Okay, but because the price is above equilibrium, not at equilibrium, we miss out on that. Again, the area of this triangle is called deadweight loss.